Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Simon Marks, and in this bulletin we'll get you a roundup of stories developing around the world. First up, as usual, the day's top headlines. The UN Climate Agency publishes a draft of the final COP26 agreement in Glasgow. The 7-page draft asks for tougher emission pledges by next year, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and it focuses on funding issues. Russian media reports that US President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin may meet for talks in person early next year, but also speak by video conference before the end of this year. A US judge orders White House records relating to the January 6th attack on the Capitol to be made available to congressional committees investigating the violent assault. It is a landmark ruling against former President Trump's efforts to keep the documents secret. China slams US lawmakers for visiting Taiwan, calling it a provocative action. The Chinese Foreign Ministry says colluding with Taiwan's independence forces is a dangerous game that is doomed to end in failure. The Delhi declaration of the regional security meeting on Afghanistan, held in the Indian capital, calls for an inclusive Afghan government. The declaration lays special emphasis on combating terrorism and providing humanitarian assistance. And a European Union court upholds a $2.8 billion fine on Google by antitrust authorities in Brussels for search engine dominance. Google can still challenge the ruling at the European Court of Justice. Leaders of the world's two largest economies, US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping, could engage in a face-to-face dialogue as soon as next week. The two leaders are reportedly preparing to hold a virtual meeting in the coming days, and ahead of it, China says that it is ready to manage its differences with the United States. Hinting at a slight warming of relations with Washington, President Xi wrote in a letter that China is willing to bring relations between the world powers back on track, provided the discussion is dominated by mutual respect. US officials believe that direct engagement with Xi is the best way to prevent the relationship between the world's two biggest economies from spiraling into conflict. Last month, US officials revealed that they had reached an agreement in principle with China to hold a virtual meeting between the two leaders before the end of the year. The virtual summit would represent an effort to ensure stability in one of the world's most fraught and tense relationships. In October, US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi held talks in Zurich. White House Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said working-level discussions between the two sides are underway. Whenever it happens, this is going to be a high-stakes meeting. Washington and Beijing have been sparring over a number of issues, including the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic and China's expanding nuclear arsenal. Experts say that the two sides may work towards an agreement to relax restrictions on visas for journalists. A White House National Security Council spokesperson has said that the planned meeting is part of US efforts to manage responsibly the country's competition with China. The last time Biden and Xi Jinping spoke was in September in a phone call that roughly lasted 90 minutes. From one high-level meeting to another, US President Joe Biden could also meet Russian President Vladimir Putin soon. The two leaders last saw one another in Geneva in June of this year. The focus of the entire world was on that summit, even though it turned out to be relatively lackluster. There was no hostility, but there was also no major breakthrough, especially for two countries whose relations were at Cold War lows. But it looks like the two leaders may be thinking of meeting again. According to Russian media reports, face-to-face talks may occur in person. Face-to-face talks may occur in person early next year, but they could also speak by video conference before the end of this year. According to the report, the two sides have not yet agreed on the details, but the preliminary plan is to hold a video conference that will pave the way for a full in-person meeting. Those Russian reports suggest that the two leaders will discuss a set of agreements that were reached at the Geneva summit. The next round of talks, though, have an enormous agenda ranging from climate change to Ukraine. The Kremlin has said that there is no firm time frame yet for a new round of talks, but both Moscow and Washington agree that they are needed. In a landmark legal ruling, a U.S. judge has ordered White House records to be released to a congressional committee, which is seeking evidence that could implicate former President Donald Trump in the January 6th attack on the Capitol building. Despite the former president's attempts to keep the documents secret, the documents have been sought by the House Select Committee investigating the violence. Denying Trump's request, the judge said it was in the public interest to release the papers and noted that President Biden is taking no action to retain the confidentiality of the papers. The ruling is a big setback for the former president, who has been trying to shield records of his actions around the time of the attack, claiming they are protected by executive privilege. Trump's lawyers have immediately said they will appeal the ruling. Investigators have been pursuing an inquiry into the extent of Trump's involvement in the attack on the Capitol. The inquiry is trying to discover whether Trump had foreknowledge of the insurrection by his conspiracy theory-believing supporters. The court ruling came after the Select Committee issued 10 new subpoenas to Trump administration officials. The committee gave the Trump officials until November the 23rd to comply with the document requests contained in the subpoena. The Biden administration has already waived executive privilege for all of the documents in the first tranche of records that were requested by the Select Committee. But last month, Trump sued the panel and the National Archives, where the papers are stored, in an attempt to halt their release. The White House records in question are highly sensitive. According to a court document, Trump hoped to block papers, including records from his top aides and memos to his press secretary. The documents also include White House visitor logs and telephone records. Hundreds of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building on January the 6th in a bid to halt the official certification of President Biden's election win. Following the riot, Trump was impeached by Congress, but cleared by lawmakers at trial in the Senate of inciting the insurrection. More than 670 people have been arrested relating to the invasion of the Capitol complex, and many of them have already been jailed. Amid raging unrest and reports of widespread arrests of ethnic Tigrayans in Ethiopia, 16 United Nations staff and their dependents have been detained in the capital Addis Ababa. There have also been reports of widespread arrests of ethnic Tigrayans, including women and children.
At least 16 United Nations staff and dependents have been detained in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa amid reports of widespread arrests of ethnic Tigrayans. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric.
We are, of course, actively working with the government of Ethiopia to secure their immediate release.
But he declined to answer a question on the ethnicity of those detained.
These are United Nations staff members They're Ethiopians, they are UN staff members, and we would like to see them released, regardless of whatever ethnicity is listed on their identity cards.
The state-appointed Ethiopian Human Rights Commission said on Sunday it had received many reports of arrests of Tigrayans in the capital, including elders and mothers with children. U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price on Tuesday said the reports are concerning.
We clearly condemned the previous expulsion of UN officials from Ethiopia, and if confirmed, we would similarly condemn arrests of UN staff members based on ethnicity.
Police have denied making ethnically motivated arrests, saying they are only targeting supporters of the Tigray rebels fighting the central government. The year-long conflict in northern Ethiopia between the government and Tigrayan forces loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, has intensified in recent weeks, as Tigrayan forces and their allies have threatened to march on the capital. Ethiopia declared a state of emergency last week that permits the government to arbitrarily arrest without a court order anyone suspected of collaborating with a terrorist group. Parliament designated the TPLF as a terrorist group earlier this year.
Next to South Africa, the sudden emergence of multiple seal carcasses is sounding an alarm among officials. Seal deaths are common during this time of year, but what has led to the sudden spike in the number? Is it pollution, malnutrition, or some other reason? Our next report investigates.
South African officials are investigating an alarming spike in seal deaths. Scores of seal carcasses have been washing up on beaches in Cape Town and along the rugged coastline north of the city. James Brent Steyen, a spokesman for the Western Cape Province's Environment Department, said seal deaths are considered normal at this time of year, but not to this extent.
One of the early theories is that it might be malnutrition. Lots of the seal carcasses are small and seem to be thin. So it might be due to malnutrition, lack of food in the oceans, but it is only a theory. We hope to have a further full clarity when the reports come back from the state veterinary services.
The provincial government said last week it had buried almost 200 seals. Experts believe an avian influenza epidemic affecting wild seabirds in the area is probably not behind the spate of seal deaths.
An alarming spike in seal deaths along the coast of the Western Cape is currently being investigated. The Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning in the Western Cape says they are aware of the dying seals that have been washing up along the coast over the past few weeks. The experts have said some deaths among seal population at this time of the year can be expected. However, the current number of dying seals is alarming. The experts have also confirmed that the seal deaths are not likely to be caused by the ongoing avian influenza epidemic affecting wild seabirds in the Western Cape. The department says a veterinary service is already conducting tests on dead seals to determine the actual cause of these deaths, and the report is expected anytime this week. This is Calden Ongmo from Pretoria, South Africa, for WION World is One.
The migrant crisis at the Polish border has now triggered a row between the EU and Russia, as well as its ally Belarus. The Eurozone is accusing Belarus of trying to weaponize migrants. At least 2,000 of them have gathered at the Belarusian border with Poland. They're trying to enter Poland, which is, of course, an EU member. Russia and Belarus are defending themselves, saying the EU has refused to discuss the crisis and the current situation.
Беларусь предлагала неоднократно, вот уже на нынешнем этапе этой ситуации на границе, проводить консультации, договариваться, решать эти вопросы на основе международного гуманитарного права. Никоим образом в публичной риторике не упоминается. Точно так же, как было отвергнуто предложение президента Лукашенко сразу же после инцидента с самолетом Ryanair приступить к консультации. Категорически никто этого не услышал. Хотя, я думаю, что другого выхода-то, кроме как разговаривать и определять на основе реальных фактов.
Russia's defense of its ally Belarus comes after Poland's prime minister accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of orchestrating the unprecedented migrant influx in a bid to destabilize the EU.
Trzeba z całą mocą podkreślić, że bezpieczeństwo naszej wschodniej granicy jest w bardzo brutalny sposób naruszane. Że to jest chyba wyjątkowa, to jest z pewnością wyjątkowa sytuacja, pierwsza taka od 30 lat, kiedy możemy powiedzieć, że bezpieczeństwo, integralność naszych granic jest w tak brutalny sposób atakowana i brutalny sposób testowana.
Meanwhile, the European Council's President, Charles Michel, is demanding a rapid solution to the crisis. He's calling on EU members to support Poland. In the beginning of October, 12 EU countries, including Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Denmark, Austria and Hungary, demanded the bloc partially finance the creation of physical barriers at the border. But European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen rejected that call.
We are facing a brutal hybrid attack on our EU borders. Belarus is weaponizing migrants' distress in a cynical and shocking way. At our last European Council, we condemned and decided to respond to these attacks, and we asked the Commission to propose all necessary measures in line with EU law and international obligations. We have opened the debate on the EU financing of physical border infrastructure, and this must be settled rapidly, because Polish and Baltic borders are EU borders, one for all and all for one.
Troops have been deployed on both sides of the Polish-Belarus border, raising fears of a confrontation. The European Union has vowed more sanctions against Belarus, the EU accusing Lukashenko of using gangster-style tactics. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has rejected accusations that he has ignited the migrant crisis. Additional migrants continue to arrive at the border with hopes of escaping, many of them flown into the country from the Middle East. Belarus has been embroiled in a political turmoil since Lukashenko's disputed election victory last year. A video obtained by Reuters shows young children living in freezing temperatures in camps. Polish border guards detained a group of migrants from a camp. The group of 16 men, women and children were guided out of the forest by Polish border forces. They were reportedly taken to a detention centre. Humanitarian workers at the United Nations say they are alarmed by the situation at the border. The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR and the International Organization for Migration say they have been in contact with the governments in Warsaw and Minsk and are calling for an urgent resolution to the crisis. Now, we told you this was coming last week, but if you want to own a piece of history, just how much are you willing to pay for it? The world's most famous and valuable stamp has gone on display at London. Our next report tells you how you can own a piece of it.
This tiny piece of history carries the distinction of being the world's most valuable stamp. This is the 1 cent magenta from British Guiana. Such is the rarity of the stamp that it is being called the Mona Lisa of stamps. And now, members of the public can own parts of it through what is known as a fractional ownership. The stamp dates back to the year 1856 and has returned to the United Kingdom for the first time in 143 years. It was bought earlier this year by rare stamps merchant Stanley Gibbons for a jaw-dropping $8.3 million. The unique stamp is now on display at the Stanley Gibbons flagship store in London. So how will the public buy parts of this rare collective item? Well, figuratively, the stamp is being split into 80,000 pieces.
What makes it so rare is that only one has survived. So normally, back in the day, you'd have small print runs of stamps, lots of local printings like this, but over time, multiples would be found. You'd get 2, 3, 4, 5 come up. This is the only straight postage stamp in Commonwealth where only one has ever surfaced. So it's thought that it was produced for local newspapers because of the 1 cent rate. Which means that a lot would have been destroyed immediately after use, and it was only a short print run to tide the colony over until more stamps arrived. So it's a very short print run, very low survival rate, and only one's turned up ever, so it's absolutely unique.
The stamp is unique, which possibly explains the enormous price tag attached to it. The stamp is tiny, to say the least. It measures 29 by 26 millimeters and features a 3-masted sailing ship. Under the fractional ownership scheme, members of the public can buy tiny parts of this already tiny stamp, with 80,000 figurative pieces available for sale on the website.
This is the third time I've seen it, but it's the first time I've ever seen the back of it, and it's fantastic to be actually so close to it. When I've seen it before, I couldn't get as near as this. And it's every man's dream to find this, every philatelist's dream, to find something like this. But it's a world, it's an icon in the world of stamps.
The stamp's weight is negligible. It's just 1/20th of a gram. That makes it gram for gram the most valuable item in the world. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Amazing. 2018 was a special year for New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. She became the country's youngest Prime Minister, also gave birth to a baby girl while she was in office. The mother-daughter duo have swooned the internet multiple times, from imperfect birthday cakes to Mother's Day greeting cards. The latest of these antics came during a Facebook Live transmission. We will leave you today with this report. Thanks for watching WION Live Broadcast from Washington.
Greater certainty for business. You're meant to be in bed, darling. It's bedtime, darling. Pop back to bed. I'll come and see you in a second. I'll come and see you in a minute, okay? Sorry, everybody. Yeah, Nanny will take you down to bed. Thanks, Nana. Well, that was a bedtime fail, wasn't it? Sorry, everyone. I thought here's a moment. I'll do a Facebook Live. We're nice and safe. Does anyone else have kids escape like 3-4 times after bedtime? Thankfully, my mum's here, so she can help out there. Okay, we are based on the health advice. Oh, it is. I'm sorry, darling. It is taking so long. Okay, I'm sorry, everyone. I'm going to just go and put Neve back to bed because this is well past her bedtime. But thanks for joining me. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to share at this point anyway, but maybe I'll jump online for an extended version, an extended uninterrupted version later in the week. Till then, thank you, everyone. I know
there are many other. This is right, Arab.